Guilhermo del Toro made a career out of what he himself calls fairy tales for adults. These are always black and white stories with clear-cut good and bad guys without any hint of self-awareness or nuance. You slap a little bit of violence and green visuals on top of it and bam, Oscars. This seems to stem from the man being utterly incapable of seeing the world with anything but the uttermost simplicity, like some sort of weird children's book. The purity with which he stares at reality also seems to apply to the world he creates, which he wholeheartedly believes and embraces, no matter how unlikely or ridiculous or just plain disgusting they may be. In a serious movie, this approach creates stories which can come off as naive and simplistic in its worldview, an attitude that clashes hard with them trying to be dark and realistic. But we are not talking about serious movies. We are talking about dumb stuff. Stuff that, in the hands of any other creator, would easily fall or even be intentionally thrown into ridicule, but which, in the hands of Guilhermo, shine with a sincerity seldom seen among popcorn flicks nowadays. I am, of course, talking about the very best film in the director's catalog. No, not this. Almost. There we go. Despite being a massive kaiju head, Del Toro didn't come up with the idea for this film. This honor befalls over Travis Bickle, who had previously collaborated with the director back when he was going to helm another script by Bickle. That movie never went anywhere, but fate eventually reunited the two men when Del Toro was approached by Legendary Pictures to look at a new script the writer had been working on. The director was very tempted by the project, but couldn't compromise on helming it as he was already committed on an adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. So thank God that movie never went anywhere, otherwise we would never get Pacific Rim. Guilhermo and Travis were a match made in heaven. Not only were they super passionate about the genre, they are also obsessed to a fault. Del Toro is well known for being way too invested in the visuals of his movies, with super detailed sets and props, which have kind of became his trademark. Bickle, on the other hand, seems not be able to stop thinking about this world he created. Just look at his Tumblr blog. People would hit him up all day long with questions about the universe of Pacific Rim, and he would continually feed this bunch of geeks with trivia he, to be honest, most likely pulled out of his ass. But the fact is that he kept tinkering with lore and stuff about this world, most of which has been taken as fact and catalogued by the fans in the wiki. In hindsight, you might think these two were overkill for such a dumb movie, but putting way too much effort into stupid ideas is what set Del Toro apart from the rest.
In Pacific Rim, we built the head of the robot, and the resulting set between the rig and the construction was about 4 stories high. This entire set would shake and would be able to drop 15 feet really rapidly for the drop of the head.
And it seems that the stupider the idea, the better, with a giant robot movie probably being the stupider it gets. When giant monsters start emerging from a dimensional rift, humanity decides the best course of action is to make giant mechs called Jaeger to counter the threat. They work greatly for a while, eventually getting decommissioned and replaced by Trump's wall to keep the aliens out. Except that doesn't work either.
The wall just got 10 feet higher!
Forcing the fate of the world to befall on the shoulders of a fake-ass American dude who don't know what belts are for, a Japanese chick who can barely speak English, and Idris fucking Elba.
You know what? Why don't you capture the guy?
You! Shut up!
Yes.
You! Keep talking.
Haven't you heard, Mr. Beckett? The world is coming to an end. So where would you rather die? Here? Or in a Jaeger?
Today, we have chosen not only to believe in ourselves, but in each other. Today we face the monsters that are at our door and bring the fight to them. Today we are canceling the apocalypse!
What follows this premise is a story about loss and moving on that could have been more impactful and shit if the main character didn't sound like that.
Look, I can't have anyone else in my head again. I'm done.
Clearly these two's talents lay elsewhere, not on writing convincing dialogue. In all honesty though, the wooden dialogue is a big part of the movie's charm, as it's delivered with complete sincerity by the cast. Of course, coming out of Idris Elba's mouth, it sounds considerably better than when said by Shirley Hunnam, culminating in that rousing speech that has already made it into the annals of movie history. This goes to show how everyone was sold on the story and was trying to make it as believable as possible. I consider this a very big virtue of the movie, as a lesser production would have easily fallen into the trappings of modern blockbuster conventions and made the whole thing a disingenuous mess, full of quipping and stupid jokes at its own expense. A lesser production like, I don't know, the sequel. As charming as the script and overall universe are, however, it's all just window dressing for the real star of a giant monster movie, the visuals. Reiterating what I've already said, Del Toro always puts a lot of love in the way his films look, and this one is no different, with the art direction going an extra mile to set each of the four main Jaegers apart from each other, both by assigning them specific colors and giving each one unique designs that not only make it super easy to tell them and their crews apart in the heat of the action, but also establishes a novel personality to the red shirt robots to make you almost forget they are supposed to be just that. The monsters are a different story though. While certainly standing apart from the huge crowd of kaiju from the genre with their unique neon markings and blood, they don't exactly stand apart from each other if you're not paying attention. Save for one or two, they have very cookie-cut designs, which actually makes sense as far as the plot goes, but doesn't exactly help to differentiate them in the long term. Of course, none of this great design would matter if it wasn't backed by some beautiful CGI, brought to you by the magic of big-budget summer blockbusters, filling to the brim the scenes with detail that add an extra layer of realism to the action, with mechanical things helping the Jaegers look more like actual working machines, and a ton of very tiny debris flying across the screen during battle to remind you of how big these beasts actually are. To top all this, we have some quite stellar animation work on the mechs and monsters. The weight and scale of them is felt every step they take, every punch they throw as they slowly move across the screen and as everything shakes and crumbles once the blow connects. There was a real effort to make it look like a $150 million kaiju film, far from the rubber suit action of yesteryear. Still, it shows some mad respect for the genre, never poking fun at its conventions and cliches. Instead of just shamelessly borrowing stuff in hopes of cashing in whatever popularity the source material might have, Pacific Rim actually feels like an honest-to-God attempt at improving on an old formula, but just on the parts that needed improvement. The essence was preserved. The film is so sincere in the way it treats its absurd premise, it actually hurts itself at times. Someone who wasn't sold on it at the start of the movie would hardly get through the whole thing without thinking, "Jeez, that's a dumb joke," and then probably never getting back into the plot because the movie never once takes a break from its childlike fantasy. It commits to it to the very end. That's not something you see often these days, where Hollywood movies seem increasingly self-aware and incapable of going all the way without at least smirking at its own silliness, mocking it instead of embracing. Audiences grew used to this kind of thing, and ultimately the straight-faced absurdity of Pacific Rim may have been somewhat unpalatable to them, hence why the movie only turned a marginal profit. Nevertheless, maybe it wasn't a film for the general audiences, maybe it was a film for fans of the genre, people like Del Toro and Beechen who just wanted to see what an old-school kaiju flick would look like using top-notch Hollywood technology. Those who bought tickets to watch just that were certainly not disappointed though, and experienced what is one of the most honest and heartfelt love letter to the genre that is, something that could only have come out of the minds of Guilhermo del Toro and its complete inability to look at the world with anything but the purest joy and wonder. That's the only explanation on how this moment stamped on me the biggest smile of my life in the pitch darkness of a movie theater back in 2013.
We're out of options, Mako!
No! まだ方法が残ってる! Sword deployment. これは私の家族のために.
To show you the power of flex tape, I saw this in half.